Welcome, dear traveler. Take a deep breath and let your shoulders gently sink into your bed. There is nothing you need to do now, no tasks to complete, no noise from the outside world to tend to, only this moment, only this story, only the quiet rhythm of history, gently unfolding like a parchment scroll in candlelight. Tonight, let's wander far back in time to a place behind stone walls and wooden beams, where the world smelled of earth and fire, where the nights were longer and the stars felt closer. We are not here to be historians, no lectures, no judgments, just quiet observers, listening to the heartbeat of the past. And tonight, we'll explore something intimate, not scandalous, not crude, but deeply human. What was love like in the medieval world? What did desire look like behind heavy curtains? How did people court, marry, and dream of one another? And in those quiet moments, when the village slept, what was intimacy really like? We'll walk softly through that world, not to invade it, but to understand it, gently, respectfully, as if eavesdropping on the whispers of a forgotten time. So close your eyes if you like, or watch the lanterns flicker on the screen. Let the stillness settle in, and let us begin. Before there was talk of passion or private rooms, there was the idea of love, shaped not by novels or films, but by church sermons, village tales, and the rhythms of the land. To understand intimacy in medieval times, we must first understand what love even meant. For many, love was not a choice. Marriage was often arranged, a contract between families, sealed with hands and land. And yet, in the cracks of duty, love did bloom, in the glance across a well, in a hand brushed during harvest, in letters exchanged, some simple, others laced with longing. In noble courts, troubadours sang songs of courtly love, elegant and forbidden, where a knight admired a lady he could never truly have. It was not about the act, but the ache, about distance, restraint, the poetry of longing. For peasants in their cottages, the story was simpler. Love could grow beside a bread oven or under the low ceiling of a hayloft. There were no serenades, only the comfort of knowing someone's breath beside you in the cold. They did not say, "I love you," the way we do, but they showed it by fetching water when the other was tired, by sewing patches into worn tunics, by warming a place beside the fire. And yes, sometimes, behind closed shutters and drawn curtains, there was physical closeness too, but even that was not always the urgent affair we imagine. In truth, medieval people spoke little of such things aloud. Much of what we know comes from church records, old letters, and quiet legal documents, which means their secrets stayed mostly theirs. But still, the clues remain. Hints of desire written in margins, carvings on old bedposts, folk songs too gentle to be obscene, but too sweet to be innocent. And so, as the stars watched from above, and the world hushed beneath blankets of wool and straw, people found love, soft, imperfect, private love, not written in history books, but tucked in the folds of everyday life. And that is where we begin. In the soft hush of the medieval countryside, before vows were spoken or doors were closed behind newlyweds, there was a season of wonder, not like our modern dating, with long conversations and shared movies, but something more, silent, symbolic, and deeply bound by custom. Let's walk together now, through a village lane dappled in morning light, where wildflowers grow along cottage fences, and the echo of footsteps blends with birdsong. There you might find a boy no older than 15 glancing across the field toward a girl gathering herbs with her mother. He says nothing. But tomorrow, perhaps, he will leave a ribbon tied loosely to her gate, and if she unties it and ties it to her wrist, he will know. The door to something has quietly opened. In noble households, the rituals were more elaborate. But still, courtship was often a blend of display and distance. A man might compose a short verse, recite it under the window of a lady's chamber, never expecting a reply, only a glance. The game was restraint. A noblewoman might drop her glove during a feast. If the man returned it, eyes lowered, fingers brushing. A message passed between them, spoken in silence. These small gestures carried weight. A handkerchief, a flower picked from a cloister garden. A gaze that lingered a moment too long. Even the church, stern though it was, could not erase the yearning between souls. And in villages where life was less adorned, people invented their own signs of affection. A basket of blackberries left on a doorstep, a carved wooden trinket shaped like a heart offered at the harvest festival, a playful nudge at the well. These were the poems of the poor, and they sang just as sweetly. But love in the medieval world was rarely free. Families watched, dowries were counted, and reputations could be shattered with a whisper. So young love had to be quiet. It lived in glances, songs, and letters folded tightly and hidden in sleeves. In towns where people could write, often among the merchant classes, lovers sometimes exchanged short notes, not passionate letters, but ones filled with metaphor. "I long for the warmth of your fire," a man might write, which meant, "I wish to be near you even if only in thought." The response might be a pressed violet dried and hidden in cloth, a message that said, "I think of you too." And then, of course, there were tokens, rings braided from horsehair, locks of hair wrapped in linen, or among the very poor, a simple pebble, polished and warmed in the hand, left beside the door. In towns, lovers met at marketplaces. In fields, they met by the hedgerow. And in castles, they met with the help of maids who turned their backs at just the right moment. But always, always, the risk was there. To be caught before marriage was not just a scandal. It could mean punishment or ruin, especially for women. So love learned to be quiet, to speak in riddles, to dance between duty and longing. And that quiet, that slowness, is what made it beautiful. Let's pause now and imagine the softest scene. A young woman sitting on a low stone wall, braiding her hair as the sun sets, watching the road, wondering if he might walk by before supper. She does not know what the future holds, only that her heart stirs when she hears his name. That, too, is part of history, and part of the night we share. The sun rises on a quiet morning, not just any morning, but the day of a marriage. Somewhere in a small village or a walled town, two people prepare to bind their lives together. But unlike today, there is no white gown, no bouquet tossed into the air. Instead, there are customs as old as the land itself, blended with the expectations of family, faith, and season. Let's wander, softly, to the edge of a small chapel, where the bell rings once, gently, and see what a medieval wedding might have felt like. In the countryside, marriage was not always romantic. It was often practical, an agreement between two families, sealed with bread and ale, not champagne. The bride might be as young as 14, the groom perhaps a little older. Sometimes they barely knew each other. Other times, they'd grown up in the same fields, sharing chores and chasing geese since childhood. Still, the ceremony held meaning. In the center of the village, under a wooden arch draped with wildflowers, the priest would read the banns, a public announcement of the union. No music, no speeches, just hands joined, vows whispered in the language of the church, and a blessing spoken in Latin, a language neither the bride nor the groom could truly understand. But what they did understand was the gravity of it. This was the start of everything. After the blessing, a small feast might follow. Not a lavish banquet, unless they were noble, but bread, onions, boiled meat, and wine or ale, passed in wooden cups. There would be laughter, simple music played on a flute, and perhaps, just perhaps, a private glance shared between two people who, until now, had never been alone together. Now, the sun sets, the feast fades, and the moment arrives for the two to share their first night as husband and wife. Let us enter their small room quietly, not to intrude, but to understand. The first night of marriage in medieval times is wrapped in myth, often misunderstood by modern imaginations. In truth, for many couples, it was quiet, awkward, uncertain, sometimes even delayed due to shyness or exhaustion. A simple straw bed, covered with wool blankets, a single candle flickering near the window, clothes carefully unfastened, layer by layer, sometimes in silence, sometimes with nervous laughter. There was no training, no guidebooks, no comfort in conversation. Just two people, told by the church that they must now become one. In noble households, the knight might have an audience, servants watching to ensure the marriage was consummated. A deeply invasive custom, often more ceremonial than passionate. But among the poor, privacy was a gift, and couples learned together slowly, guided more by instinct than instruction. What did they feel? We do not know. But we can imagine the chill of a stone floor under bare feet, the unfamiliar weight of another body beside you, the soft sound of your spouse breathing in the sleep, and in that quiet, something began, not just desire, but domestic life. Marriage in medieval times was not just about love or intimacy. It was about survival. Two people managing a home, raising livestock, stoking fires, kneading dough. Days were filled with labor, but also with small moments of togetherness. A husband might build a bench while his wife spun wool. They might share apples by the fire, or speak of the weather, or sit in silence after the day's toil. The medieval home was dim and drafty, but within it, warmth grew over time. Not just from hearths, but from habits, from touch, from the knowledge that each day began and ended with the same quiet presence beside you. Breathe deeply now. Let your mind drift further into the quiet folds of the past, a world where mirrors were rare, and knowledge of the body was shaped more by myth and church than by medicine. Tonight, we tiptoe gently into the most personal realm. How medieval people thought about their bodies, what they believed about men and women, and how they tried to keep clean in a time before plumbing and perfume. But fear not, there will be no harshness here, only a soft candle's glow and the slow unfolding of the human story. In medieval thought, men and women were believed to be made of the same basic elements, earth, air, fire, and water, but in different balances. Men were thought to be hotter and drier, women cooler and wetter, more sensitive, more prone to emotion. These ideas came not from science, but from ancient texts passed down through generations, from Greek philosophers like Galen, whose ideas shaped medicine for over 1,000 years. A woman's body was considered mysterious, inward, private. It was often feared, misunderstood, and wrapped in silence. Men were expected to lead, to speak, to command, to protect. Women were expected to yield, to nurture, to endure, and yet reality was more complex. Peasant women worked in the fields. Merchant women ran businesses. And behind every nobleman was a wife managing household accounts, land, and diplomacy. Medieval life had its rigid rules, but people, as always, found ways to live beyond them. You may have heard the old myth that medieval people were filthy, that they bathed once a year or never at all. But the truth is more peaceful. Bathing was not daily, but it was known. People used warm cloths, scented with herbs like lavender and rosemary. They washed their hands and faces each morning, scrubbed feet before bed, and changed their linen shirts to keep the body fresh. Public bathhouses existed in towns, wooden tubs filled with steaming water, sometimes shared by neighbors or couples. These bathhouses were social places. One might hear gossip or music or prayers spoken softly over rising steam, but they also held risk. The church frowned on shared nudity, and some bathhouses were accused of hosting more than just bathing. Eventually, many were shut down. In the countryside, people bathed in rivers or wooden barrels near the fire. Soap was made from animal fat and ash, or sometimes bought from merchants, rich with oils and flower essence. The poor bathed less often, but they prized cleanliness of linen and hair. Children were scrubbed before Sunday Mass, and even the simplest of homes had a basin of water near the hearth. Imagine now, a woman combing her hair beside a glowing fire, a basin of lavender water cooling nearby, the soft scratch of a wooden brush against her scalp, her eyes half closed in evening peace. That, too, was part of medieval intimacy. Not just touch, but care. Not just bodies, but presence. Much of what people knew about the body came from religion. They believed illness was caused by sin or imbalance. That desire was a fire to be feared, especially outside of marriage. But not all saw it so darkly. Some old village midwives whispered different truths, that the body could be joyful, that women had power in birth and herbs and healing. Of course, such women were often feared, called witches, but many were simply wise, keepers of forgotten knowledge, passed mother to daughter. And in the private space of a marriage, bodies were less feared. They were tended to, fed, clothed, washed, and sometimes loved. Soft touches were not written down, but they lived in memory, in lullabies, in quiet companionship. That is where we find the real story, not in grand events, but in everyday tenderness. So now, dear listener, as the candle burns low and your breath grows slower, we remember that even in a time of myths and mystery, people were still people. They cared for their bodies, their lovers, their children, in ways that were imperfect, yes, but deeply human. They did not have mirrors, but they had each other, and that was enough. The day has ended. The fields have emptied. Even the cows have settled in their stalls. The village is asleep, and so are most of its stories, but not all. There is still life here in the hush of darkened rooms, beneath quilts made of old wool scraps, beside embers glowing in stone hearths. Let us now wander quietly into those rooms, to see how medieval people slept, what they dreamed of, and how love softened with time. Beds in the medieval world were not just places to sleep, they were precious, a sign of stability, a space for warmth, birth, healing, and quiet closeness. For the rich, a bed might be grand, carved from oak, with curtains of velvet to keep out the cold, layers of feather mattresses, embroidered sheets, fur-lined blankets. A space large enough to share with spouse, servant, or even a child. But for most, a bed was modest, a wooden frame, sometimes nothing more than ropes stretched across planks. On top, straw or wool-stuffed sacks wrapped in linen. If you were very poor, you slept on the floor, on rushes scattered near the fire. But even the humblest of beds held meaning. It was where life began and ended, where secrets were whispered, and where hands, calloused by labor, found comfort in touch. People often shared beds, husbands and wives, yes, but also children, siblings, even travelers. Privacy was rare, but warmth, that was needed more than modesty. Bedtime began early. At sundown, chores finished, doors bolted, the home dimmed to a hush. A candle was lit, shoes were removed, and the body curled beneath rough but familiar blankets. No electricity, no distractions, just darkness and one another. Sleep in those days came in two parts. It was called segmented sleep. People would drift off in the early evening, wake again after a few hours, and lie quietly, talking, praying, even making love, before falling into a second, deeper sleep. This quiet space between sleeps was known as the watch, a liminal hour, when thoughts wandered, and couples often found each other again, not out of urgency, but out of a shared silence. Can you picture it? Two figures beneath a blanket, staring up at dark rafters, hearing owls in the distance, whispering dreams or memories in the hush. They have no clock to watch, no emails to check, only each other. Sometimes that was enough. The idea of passion as fire, burning fast and bright, was not common in medieval marriages. Instead, intimacy deepened over years, through care, through routine, through the gentle patience of shared survival. A wife might rub her husband's sore back after the harvest. A husband might bring his wife a warm mug of ale during winter chills. Touch was often simple. A hand on a knee, a shared quilt, a foot brushed in sleep. And for those lucky enough to find both respect and kindness, a deep love could grow, quiet, unspoken, but steady as the ticking of a wooden water clock. In later years, many couples slept in the same bed until death. Even as bodies aged and aches made movement slower, they stayed close. Love was not in the grand gestures. It was in the nearness, in knowing the rhythm of the other's breath, in the way hands found each other, even in dreams. So now, as your own eyes grow heavier, and your own body settles deeper into warmth and stillness, you are not so far from them, are you? From those long ago sleepers, from those quiet lovers, from those who curled together against the night. Their worries have faded into dust, but their love, their closeness, still whispers. It is here, in every breath you take now. You are safe, you are warm, and the night is long and gentle. The candle has burned low, and outside a winter wind begins to stir. But within a small medieval home, something ancient and gentle is unfolding. The soft cries of a newborn, the rustle of linen, the murmur of a lullaby whispered in the dark. Tonight, we speak not of passion, but of what comes after, of fertility, family, and the delicate rituals that begin the slow weaving of a new life into the old. In medieval times, to have many children was both blessing and burden. There were no tests, no calendars, no sterile clinics, only moon cycles, herbal lore, and quiet hope. For the rich, fertility was a legacy, to carry on a family name, a coat of arms, an estate. For the poor, it was survival. Children helped on farms, tended fires, gathered wood, and grew into hands that worked beside yours. But birth was uncertain, miscarriages were common, infant loss heartbreakingly normal. And so, every child who did survive was cherished more deeply than words could say. To avoid pregnancy or encourage it, people turned to plants. A woman might drink a tea brewed from wild carrot seed, or tie herbs into sachets worn beneath her skirt. These were whispered practices passed between midwives and mothers. The church forbade most of it, but women always found their way. They read their own bodies, watching for signs, feeling shifts, trusting rhythms as old as time. A pregnant woman in the medieval world was both revered and fragile. She might be excused from heavy chores, offered extra portions of food, or given a charm, a saint's medal, a carved stone, to protect the child inside her. The womb was seen as a sacred space, but it was also feared, painful, unpredictable. Midwives, the true keepers of this domain, were called not just for birth, but for guidance through the long, quiet wait. They brought prayers, but also vinegar, honey, lavender oil, and willow bark. They sang songs, rubbed backs, told stories to soothe nerves as bellies grew. And all the while, in the corner of the cottage, a small wooden cradle was carved, lined with sheepskin, and set beside the hearth, waiting. Childbirth in those days was rarely public. It took place in a sealed room with shutters closed, candles lit, and prayers whispered over warm water. No men were allowed, only women, mothers, sisters, midwives, formed a circle of calm. There were no screams, not in this telling, only breathing, low moans, and hands, strong, steady, helping life enter the world. The moment of birth was both miracle and risk. And when the child finally cried, a cheer might echo from the cottage, or in noble halls bells might ring. But often it was simple. A soft sigh, a relieved smile, a prayer murmured into the cradle. After the birth came the first night. The mother wrapped in blankets, the baby swaddled in linen, a cradle rocking gently beside the bed. There were no night lights, only a single flame. And the hum of a lullaby passed down from grandmother to mother to child. These songs weren't always in words. Sometimes just a tune, low and slow, rising like breath in the cold air. A newborn's cry might pierce the silence, but soon the rocking returns, and all is calm again. Some lullabies were prayers, others were nonsense rhymes, but each one carried the same message. You are safe, you are loved, sleep now. And so the home grew fuller, not louder, but warmer. The child's cries were not noise, they were life, evidence that the world had been made new once again. So now, as you lie still, imagine that cradle swaying softly near the fire, the mother's breath slow and steady, the child's hand curled like a shell. No noise, no fear, only the rhythm of love in a time long gone, yet still close enough to touch in your dreams. The seasons turn, the fields grow golden, then pale, the cradle becomes a bench, the children tall, and the couple, once young and shy, now walks a little slower and speaks more softly than before. But the love, it is still there, Not loud, not dramatic, but like a candle that never quite goes out. Let us now step into that stage of life where affection becomes presence and romance becomes ritual. Medieval couples rarely spoke of love in the ways we do today. There were no anniversaries with roses, no love letters in retirement. But their lives were full of gestures, small and sacred. A wife might mend the same tear in her husband's tunic every autumn and kiss the back of his hand before handing it back. A husband might rise early to fetch firewood so that she wouldn't wake to cold. These were not grand acts. They were devotions. Over time, couples developed their own rhythm. Words weren't always needed. A glance at the supper table, a warm piece of bread shared first, a hand brushing another's shoulder at the end of a long day. In noble homes, couples might gift each other relics. A ring blessed by a priest, a book of psalms written in careful hand, a lock of hair sealed in beeswax. They marked the passing of years not with numbers, but with survival. We made it through the last harvest. We endured the plague that took others. We watched our sons become men. In village homes, these rituals were simpler still. A shared meal on the night of their wedding day, a candle lit before their patron saint every winter, a small loaf baked with honey just once a year. It was all enough. For many couples, spiritual life was central, but not always in public chapels. Behind closed doors, in the dim corners of their homes, they created their own sacred spaces. A carved cross on the wall, a small altar with dried flowers, a prayer whispered before sleep, not to ask for fortune, but to give thanks for another day together. Some even prayed for each other's health, touching foreheads, tracing crosses on palms, lighting beeswax candles when the other was sick. And sometimes they sat together in silence, watching shadows flicker on the wall, feeling faith not as doctrine, but as comfort in the known rhythm of a shared life. As age crept in, bodies slowed. Hands once quick with flax or plow became softer, trembled more. But the tenderness only deepened. There was a quiet dignity in being seen, truly seen, after decades together. She knew how he liked his bread. He knew which blanket she pulled higher on cold nights. They had seen storms and loss and lean winters, and yet they were still here, still side by side. Many older couples continued to sleep in the same bed, not always for warmth, but for familiarity. Their nighttime talks became shorter, sometimes just a word, a sigh, a kiss to the temple. When one fell ill, the other watched, fed broth, held a hand, prayed until sleep came. They were not afraid of death, only of being the one left behind. But often they passed not far apart. And even if one stayed longer, they would carry the other with them in every folded cloth, every whisper to the hearth, every dream where the past still flickered. So now, as your breath deepens and your body sinks further into rest, remember this: love is not only in the blush of youth or the thrill of the new. It is in the quiet, the enduring, the ordinary made sacred through time. It lives in soft glances, in warm bread, in shared blankets, in hands that never quite let go. And as the stars return tonight, you rest within the same quiet mystery, the deep, still warmth of a love that lingers. The fire is low now. Shadows stretch across the beams overhead. And outside, beneath the velvet hush of the night sky, stories begin to stir. Not written in books, not read aloud in noble halls, but whispered from mother to daughter, from old wives to young brides, from hearth to heart. Tonight we wander softly through those tales, the half-truths and quiet wishes that shaped how medieval people imagined love, desire, and the strange alchemy between souls. Long before modern science, people turned to the earth to shape their fortunes in love. A sprig of rosemary tucked in a pillow, a ribbon worn around the thigh, a locket filled with hair, sealed with wax and buried beneath the threshold. These were not spells as we might picture them, but gentle superstitions, wishes wrapped in herbs and prayers. A girl might place 5 daisies beneath her pillow to dream of her future husband. A boy might carve a heart into a hazel tree and wait to see if the bark closed around it. A sign, they said, that his love would be returned. Lovers sometimes exchanged tiny talismans, pieces of bone, acorns, or carved wooden tokens, objects with no value to others, but filled with meaning to them. In quiet villages, some women were known as wise folk, midwives, herb keepers, charm weavers. They knew which plants soothed the heart, which words to say at a birth, which direction to stir honey for luck. Not witches exactly, but not quite ordinary either. People feared them, respected them, needed them, and they kept the oldest stories alive, the ones that said love was not just chance, but craft. The night in medieval thinking was a time of mystery, a veil between worlds. Dreams were taken seriously. Some believed the Virgin Mary appeared in dreams to comfort women. Others feared incubi and spirits, shadows that entered homes when hearts were unguarded. So protections were made, a knife placed under the bed, garlic hung at the window, prayers carved into door frames, invisible but present. For romance there were softer beliefs. A candle lit with both lovers' names carved into it was said to ensure fidelity. A pair of doves nesting near the house meant peace would follow the marriage. And if you dreamt of washing your beloved's hair under moonlight, it was thought a sign that your bond would last beyond death. Imagine now, if you will, a woman standing at her small wooden table, crushing dried rose petals into oil, her fingers moving with memory, her eyes closed as she hums a tune only her grandmother remembered. She dips a ribbon in the oil, lets it dry by the fire, then ties it around her wrist. A promise, a hope, a protection. That, too, was part of love in the Middle Ages. The moon was thought to guide more than tides. It ruled fertility, motion, and even the timing of a wedding. Some women tracked their cycles by moonlight. They believed conception was more likely under a waxing moon, and less so when it waned. Couples might marry during full moons, hoping for abundance. Astrologers, for those who could afford them, would study birth charts, matching stars to souls, predicting harmony or discord in unions. Whether or not these things were true didn't matter. The belief brought comfort. The ritual gave rhythm. The mystery gave magic to an otherwise quiet life. So now, dear listener, as the final logs in the fire begin to crackle low, and your breath slows to match the ancient rhythm of night, know this: you are part of a long story, one written in shadow and starlight, in carved hearts and whispered names. The myths may fade, the herbs may wither, but the longing for love, the wish to hold and be held, is timeless. And tonight, it holds you. The candle has flickered once, then twice, and now only a small ember glows where flame once danced. The bed is warm, the blanket drawn high, and the room is as still as a church at midnight. But the mind begins to drift. This was the hour the medieval world called between the veils, between waking and sleep, between body and soul. A time for whispers, for touch without words, and for dreams to begin their long, quiet climb into the stars. In the Middle Ages, sleep was not merely rest. It was a journey. People believed the soul left the body while they slept, floating, visiting heaven or purgatory or places unseen. Some feared this, afraid the soul might not return. Others welcomed it, believing it brought wisdom from beyond the veil. To sleep too deeply was risky. To be restless? A sign of guilt or hidden longing? People slept in segments, first sleep, then a wakeful hour or two, then second sleep. During that wakeful time, many prayed. Others made love. Some simply spoke. Soft talk in the dark. Stories were shared. Fears were soothed. Wounds from the day were quietly tended to, with no light but moon or ember. This watch, as they called it, was a time when even the simplest touch, a hand across a blanket, a thumb brushing a cheek, could say everything. There was no word for pillow talk in the medieval tongue, but the feeling was known. After the labor of the day, when the night closed in and voices could fall into whispers, couples spoke differently, softer, more open. A wife might confess a fear. A husband might share a dream. Sometimes they laughed. Other times they simply lay in stillness, their breaths in rhythm, their fingers tracing the grain of old wood behind the bed. There was no need to impress, no performance, just presence. This was the true romance, not in the fire, but in the embers, not in the chase, but in the staying. In medieval times, dreams were taken seriously. A dream of fire might mean temptation, of water, a cleansing. To dream of flying was considered a sign of spiritual awakening. To fall, a warning. Couples might interpret each other's dreams together, not with logic, but with care. A wife might say, "I dreamt of you beside a well, and a dove landed on your hand." And the husband might smile, seeing it as a sign of peace to come. Some dreamt of lovers long lost, others of angels or demons, or doors that opened and led nowhere. But always, when dawn returned, the dream faded into silence, and what remained was the warmth of another body beside you, real, steady, known. And finally, sleep came, not as a thief, but as a friend. In medieval prayers, people often said, "Lord, if I do not wake, take my soul gently." Because each night was a letting go, a surrender of self, a return to something greater. And so couples made peace with each day. Through a final glance, a whispered prayer, a final, familiar exhale. They fell asleep not fearing death, but wrapped in the knowledge that they had loved and been loved. And that was enough. So as your own breath grows slower now, as your limbs grow heavier, and the room around you softens into silence, you are no longer in the century. You are in a stone cottage, beneath wool blankets, beside someone you trust. The fire has faded. The dreams are near. And the soul is ready to wander, just for a while, safe, held, whole. The fire is out. The candle has gone cold. The hearth is dark. And the stars, they shine like soft eyes watching from above. In this final hour, we need no more stories. Only memory, only presence. Let us walk one last time through the quiet village of the past, where the cottages sleep, and time moves as slow as breath. You have traveled through a full life. From the shy glance across a market stall, to the carved initials on a hazel tree, to the laughter of children on a dirt floor, you felt the softness of a hand in the dark. heard lullabies in old tongues, shared bread baked with love, watched age bring peace instead of fear. This is what they left behind. Not monuments, not books, not gold, but small, beautiful moments, still echoing, still warm. Every kiss by a firelight, every whispered story between first and second sleep, every prayer murmured into the folds of a shared blanket. They live on because they were real, because they mattered. Medieval people believed in the soul. They believed it had weight and warmth and light, and that when the time came, the soul would rise gently, like steam for morning tea, like a song forgotten but never lost. In their last hours, many were not alone. A hand was held, a forehead was kissed, a psalm was sung softly into the silence. They were not afraid, because love had carried them this far, and love would carry them farther still. The world has changed. The castles are ruins. The villagers gone, but the love, it is still there, in the shape of the land, in the hush of night, in the silence between your breaths right now. And so we end, not with a farewell, but with a presence. You are tucked in. The stories have been told. The past has wrapped itself around you like a woolen quilt. And now you sleep beneath stars that watched every birth, every kiss, every final sigh of all those who came before. Good night, sleep well, and drift gently into the stillness of time.